We're very excited about our relationship with Dr. Terry Waite, or Sir Terry Waite, I believe would be since he's been knighted, the proper introduction. Many of you are aware of the long, illustrious service that he has been involved in. He's most known, obviously, for his captivity with the Hezbollah many years ago, and how he handled himself with such graciousness and diplomacy in a very difficult situation for up to 5 years. You will hear more about that today. But beyond that, he's done tremendous work in the humanitarian field. He serves children and humanitarian causes around the world, written several books, he lectures, he teaches. He has, like I said, been our scholar in residence this year, and it's been a fabulous experience. I do want to say that the man may have survived 5 years of captivity, but he couldn't get his luggage to Nashville. Actually, I think that may be more Americans' fault than his, but he was quite concerned that he only had the clothes on his back, and I told him, as being good Southerners, we would never judge you for what you wore. And we're excited you're here. The Institute for Conflict Management has been in existence for almost 7 years now. For those of you who don't know us, we offer a combination of a master's degree and graduate training, along with service to the community, helping entities and people through difficult moments. And we've had, I believe, around 300 graduate students in our program over 7 years, many graduates who are serving the community, the state, nationally and internationally in the fields of managing conflict and difficulty. And we're quite pleased by our ability to serve the community. We plan for that to grow. We plan to be even more engaged. And if there's any way we can ever serve you as the Institute, we're happy to do that. But what I'd most like to do today is introduce Terry Waite and Dr. Lowry and spend about 30 minutes listening to a dialogue between these two people about managing difficulty, how to handle ourselves, and how to serve people in difficult moments. Randy Lowry and Terry Waite.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to all of you. I'm always impressed when people get up early and come to something at Lipscomb, and that happens several days a week. We hope that these are moments that will take you through your day, and you will remember, will inspire you, will impress you in some way, and enrich your life. This is a really, really special 3 days for us. A number of years ago, Terry and I met on another university campus, and then through these years, we've been able to touch each other periodically, but it's a tremendous privilege to have you again on the Lipscomb campus and to be able to present you and allow you to make new friends and people here to know you. I was thinking this morning about two things. One is I was thinking about the people in my life that if I had a short list, who would be up there as the people that I was just enormously thankful to have met. And you're near the top of that list. You're near the top of the list as I think about life and just the opportunity for humans to interact with each other. This has just been a real blessing. The other thing I was thinking about was story. And the reality that all of us live in a story. We don't have the ability always to script that story, but we live in a story. And we choose other stories to live in. And if there is a life story that is fascinating from the standpoint of resilience and the standpoint of sacrifice and the standpoint of forgiveness and the standpoint of all kinds of words that many of us would have a hard time bringing into our own lives, it's Terry's story. So let's talk about story for a little bit. And I gave Terry permission to do something. Not that he wouldn't have done it anyway, but I gave him permission to answer my questions, or if he chose to, answer any question he wanted to answer, even if it wasn't my question. But I'm going to try to take us back and ask him to share a little bit of his early life, long before Beirut, long before notoriety, long before working for the Archbishop of Canterbury. Take us back to those moments where you're growing up in England and you're thinking about the life ahead of you, and you had a moment where you thought about faith and how you might work in that more professionally. You thought about the Army, I think, for a little bit of time. And then we're in something called the Church Army. Tell us about some of those years.
Well, I think, first of all, Randy, it's very nice to be here today and good to see old friends whom I met last year in Woodstock. Very nice to be back. Going back, over 70-odd years now.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but it is going back a way.
I had a very pleasant surprise coming through Chicago. Not losing my luggage. I lost my luggage, which was an unpleasant surprise. But I came to the screening, and they said, "Can you remove your shoes?" I said, "You have a notice there which says, if you're 75 or over, you can keep your shoes on, and your coat. Did you know that?" Well, you can. So I kept my shoes on, at least, and came through. Now, we're going back to the early days. Like many young people, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I'd been brought up as a very ordinary, traditional Anglican, member of the Church of England. It was often suggested to me that I ought to go for ordination, to become a clergyman, and I never felt that that was my vocation. But in some ways, I had a desire to be of service to the wider community. I don't know where that came from. It was just something within me. But where and from what base? Then I hit upon the organization which you've referred to, the Church Army, which was founded in Victorian times, largely engaged in various endeavors of social work, prison work, working with the homeless, all that type of thing. And they had their own college in those days, which was linked with the university in London. And so I went through that. And then when I was through that training, first of all, I worked as an education officer in a region of Bristol, for England called Bristol in the West Country, where I was an education officer for the Diocese of Bristol, largely engaged in adult education work, and then went to Uganda to be an advisor to the first African Archbishop of Uganda. And that was the time when General Amin came to power. And it was my first experience of having to negotiate at that level with individuals such as Amin, with whom I met on many occasions, and who was utterly ruthless and brutal. If anybody here has seen the film, The Last King of Scotland, I mean, that does illustrate very clearly something of Uganda in those days. I went there I was married then, I went there with my wife and 3 young children, and there was a period of comparative peace, because Amin's tactic prior to the coup was to break the infrastructure of the country, and he did that by demoralizing the police force, and by allowing the military to run riot. So the military would be engaged in all sorts of nefarious activities. I mean, I lost two cars. I was held up at gunpoint twice, lost 2 vehicles. I don't want to paint this picture and give the idea that that's the whole of Uganda and that's the only picture. Ugandan people are, in the main, delightful people, but they have been beset with political, like many African countries, political and intertribal problems. And one of my responsibilities there was to conduct courses which would enable participants to see somehow more clearly the dynamics of intertribal and intergroup conflict. And we did a number of those courses around the country, training leaders in that area. And then the coup broke out, and it was devastating. Makerere University in Kampala was at one time one of the leading universities in Africa, comparable with South Africa and Egypt. Today, it has still not recovered from the ravages that were inflicted on it by Amin. It used to have a fine medical school, fine campus. I've been back in Uganda several times subsequently, and it's just a tragedy. And it's a tragedy, really, what's happening to the whole of Africa. But I could expand on that, but let me just stop at that point. You come back in. I don't want to be dominating the
Well,
conversation.
early on, there was a sense of service that was just a part of who you were, and that's continued for 50 or 60 years with some interruptions a couple of times along the way. But that just seemed to be a part of who you are and continued to be. Is there any explanation for that?
I think I have a profound sympathy with people who get into difficulties for one reason or another, who find themselves at the bottom of the pile. I have a profound sympathy with them. I have a profound sympathy with those who find themselves in prison. Not that I am in any sense soft on crime or what have you, but it's because I think, and in particular as a result of my experience as a captive, when I was forced into very deep self-reflection, that I recognized within myself the dark side. And I'm able to say, when I see somebody in difficulty, there, but for the grace of God, go I. In other words, to have that degree of empathy, if you like, rather than just taking the view of condemning people because you're a bad hat. I'm potentially a bad hat, potentially. You know, I hope I live a reasonable and decent life. But I know within me there are those, put it this way, there are those seeds which could enable me to be really what I would not really want to be, put it like that. So I think that is a motivating factor. Also, when it comes to, you made some very nice comments about me, for which I thank you. But I think there are very, very few people, I would not include myself in this, who are totally full of altruism. I mean, I think we all have a degree of altruism, but I'm going to give you an example of that. And if I can just skip over the years a bit, and you probably want to go back again, but let me just go over the years a bit. When I was in captivity, and I was in captivity for almost 5 years in solitary confinement, I was kept in chains, hand and foot, in a dark room for 23 hours and 50 minutes a day. No books or papers and no companionship. I had to pull a blindfold over my eyes. And no possibility of escape because I was just chained to the wall. But on one occasion, I went into the bathroom. I was given one visit to the bathroom a day. And on this occasion, I wasn't well, and they gave me an extra visit to the bathroom. When I got in there, I discovered on the top of the cistern that the guard who'd been in there previous to myself had left a loaded automatic. Now I knew it was loaded. As you mentioned again earlier, I had military training, national service in England. And quick as a flash, I thought, well, what do I do? Do I take it? If I take it and use it, I'm going to have to kill that man and shoot my way out as a chance. Then I thought, well, what have you been saying in all your negotiations with terrorists and others around the world? You've always said, if you're in a tight corner, don't use violence. And now, coming back to you, the very words you've been saying to people come back to you. What are you going to do in this situation? So, quick as a flash, I said, okay. Called the guard back, said, you've left something. He took it, went away. Now, looking back on that, I say to myself, Well, was that a trick? Were they testing me? Or was it authentic? I don't think it was a trick. But I don't regret doing what I did. It did cost me another few, possibly either saved my life because I may have been killed in the shootout, or it may have given me, it did give me another few years in captivity. But I don't regret, on that occasion, sticking to what I believed to be right, what I'd said. Now, what I'm saying is, I can't say always that I've done that. But I think there are certain points in life where you go back, and this is the importance of a good education and a good grounding, such as you give people here, to get hold of certain principles and to say, well, look, if I'm going to take that principle, I'm going to do that about conflict, I myself, at some point in life, might well be called to live by it. So it's not just a case of academic understanding. It's a case of, and I've seen that time and time again. I've seen that with, I used to work a lot with Desmond Tutu. Desmond, who's written recently, and I know you know the book, a remarkable book on forgiveness. He and his daughter have written that remarkable. It's very, very good, but well worth reading. Most horrendous situations. And I've been with Desmond in South Africa when he's received the most awful threats on telephone and so on. But always he has gone back to his first principles: love your neighbor as yourself. No matter how they vilified him. And he's stuck by it. And he's been an example to me many times. But
So-
I am not saying that I am all righteousness, because I'm not. You know, I hope I have a really healthy understanding of my own weak points as well as my better points.
But those values were already implanted in you when those moments then came along.
I think one learns to embrace the values more fully as you get more experience in life. You start off in college, university, wherever you are, and you get all the principles that are spoken to you. And then you have to face the harsh reality of the world.
Right.
Then you have to face the hard rub. What to do in a business situation when you're faced with some of the things that happen in business,
Right.
or in the world in a conflict situation. And then you have to say, what I've been learning here, how is that going to be applied by me? And we should not run away with the idea, you know, that there's nothing that individuals can do to change situations. I mean, Desmond is a great example in point. Ordinary chap in many ways, extraordinary in others, but from a very, very ordinary and simple background. I give an example of that, if I may.
Go ahead.
And I'm leaping ahead. I think I've told you this story before, but not too long ago, I've been back to Beirut several times.
Right.
And on the last occasion, I went back because I was really concerned, as many other people have been deeply concerned, about the situation facing refugees on the border. Hundreds and thousands of them flooding over into Lebanon, and poor Lebanon doing its best to cope with this massive influx of people, and at the same time, Lebanon, as you well know, having its own internal political and conflictual situations. So I went to see this situation, to see what I could make of it and what help I could give, if any, or me and my organizations I'm associated with. And it was, I went through the Bekaa Valley up to the border. And then I again reflected on the situation. What on earth can we do about this crazy situation in the Middle East? Not just in Lebanon, but Israel, Palestine, the whole shooting match, which has been such a contentious issue for so long, for so many people. I thought, what can be done? And then I thought, well, A political solution can only emerge if you have the people who are involved in that situation agreed together. If there can be a better relationship of trust. That was so in Northern Ireland and with the IRA and others where I've been involved. I thought, but what can I do about that? It's no good me just sitting on a chair here saying that sort of thing or giving, making a few sermons or what have you. What can I do about it? So I thought, you're in the place where you've had an experience, go back and see Hezbollah. So 20 years or 25 years previously, I'd gone in a car at night to their secret headquarters, hoping and accepting their invitation to go and see hostages who were sick and dying. And instead of letting me do that, they captured me. Okay. Well, 25 years later, I got into another car at night to go back and see them. And I arrived at their secret headquarters. They have different headquarters, different places in and around Lebanon, so they're not all concentrated in one place. I went up to see the head man, who was, to put it mildly, surprised to see me. He was very surprised. And I said to him what I've said to you. I said, as far as you and I are concerned, I want to put the past in the past and try and build something new for the future. And he was amazed. And from that point, instead of responding as a macho terrorist political leader,
Right.
he responded as a human being. And then I said to him, will you do something for me? He said, what is it? I said, will you give me heating oil for those refugees on the border? He said, yeah, we will. They did it. Very, very small gesture. I don't believe for one moment that that one gesture is going to change the whole scene. But I do believe that if 10,000 people on one side and 10,000 people on what seems to be an opposing side were to get together and try and understand each other as human beings, and on the basis of that begin to build a political structure, we might get somewhere. At least it would make some difference, rather than this endless nonsense that we're seeing around the world at the moment.
And so there is a bit of a debate in the conflict management field, and you've answered one side of it. The debate says, do you resolve conflict, then people can establish a relationship? You're saying, no, we really have to establish the relationship, which then will help us resolve conflict.
Yeah.
And that's pretty counterintuitive when we're already in conflict, right?
Yeah.
I want you to go back a little bit. We'll get confused as to time here.
Yeah,
but
of course.
I want you to go back and talk a little bit about the time you were negotiating with Gaddafi in Libya, and share with me, if you will, share with us the kind of mind games he played as you were having to negotiate. Walking across the field, do you remember, in terms of where they did the executions in the stadium or something?
Yeah.
He worked you over pretty well, and yet you were still very successful.
Well, I've been what you might term a humanitarian negotiator, still involved in that field.
Sure.
That means that I've not been in employ of government.
Right.
I've been as independent as I can be in these situations. And what I've tried to do in these situations is, as an independent negotiator, try and get to the heart and root of the issue and understand it, and then try and find a way politically whereby that can be resolved. When it comes to hostage taking, first of all, there are two types of hostage taking, roughly speaking. There's hostage taking, which I would describe as merely political hostage taking, where hostages are taken and the group that's taken them have a political goal in mind. They wish to use the hostages as pressure points to achieve their political goal. And there's hostage taking, which you might describe as being purely criminal, where ransom is demanded. both are criminal acts, of course, but one is, you'd make that division for the sake of clarity. But most of my interventions have been in the political field, try and find a political solution. And the great difficulty, I think, in many of these situations is, even when you're successful, and success being measured in terms of enabling people to come out of captivity, you're never quite sure how many factors there are in this situation that you do not know. Who else has been involved in this? What's been going on in the background? What game is Gaddafi playing? What game are other people playing? Because you can guarantee that there are dozens of people all playing games around this. And one of the terrible difficulties about hostage situations is that governments of whatever hue, east, west, wherever they may be, very often use hostage situations to pursue other political objectives. And so you are in a very, very confusing and complex situation. I met Gaddafi on 2 or 3 occasions. The first met him in his tent in his compound, and there's a nice picture of myself greeting Gaddafi, where I'm bending like that. It looks like I'm bowing to him, paying obeisance to him. In fact, the tent was so low I couldn't stand up in it. that was the reason. But what is very interesting, what I had to do in that situation. Well, to explain it very briefly, British businessmen had been captured in Libya. Nobody knew what was going on. They thought it was just Gaddafi up to his old tricks and being particularly awkward again and particularly difficult and wanting to threaten the West one way or another. When I got to see him, there was a very different story. And this illustrates how important it is to get to the root of the issue, not just to accept gossip, not just to accept newspaper reports, not even to accept what the Foreign Office might tell you, to try and get to the root yourself and hear from, so to speak, the horse's mouth what the situation is. He said to me what he wanted was better relations with the West. And what had happened was that the British businessmen had been captured by a group of young radicals in that country who were modeling themselves then on what has since become the Al-Qaeda model. And he wanted to keep them on side. So in order to keep them on side, if he'd said to them, well, let the hostages go, which he could have easily done, he'd have alienated them. So he had an internal political situation he had to deal with. So what I did was get round and meet with the radicals. I discovered that they were angry because the captivity had taken place after the shooting of a woman police constable in London, and she was shot allegedly by a gunman from the Libyan embassy and killed on the streets of London. The British public, understandably, were furious about that. The radicals then said back in Libya that many British people in the UK were being unduly victimized as a result of this trouble, ordinary people. They wanted something doing about it. So I came back to the UK. I set up an independent telephone system where any Libyan national who felt he was being persecuted could deal with it, could get an answer, independent of the authorities. And that resolved the issue. You see, so it wasn't, just a straightforward Gaddafi up to his old games again.
Right.
It was much more a human problem, and basically one got to that. Now, it doesn't mean to say that Gaddafi wasn't full of tricks and wasn't full of mischief. But, I enabled, this is a very interesting point, and I don't know the answer to this, but I then, to meet Gaddafi's demands for better relations with the West, I helped set up a meeting between Gaddafi and the British Foreign Office, which took place in Rome. The first meeting took place in Rome, which I went to as an independent observer. I had no no faith in that meeting at all, because I realized that it was just not the Western policy to have, for whatever reason, relationships with him. And I knew that it was not going to go anywhere. I didn't go to the second meeting. The whole thing collapsed. After which, Gaddafi then, in a fit of pique, I think, went on to do all the terrible things he did in supplying the IRA with arms, creating havoc in Ireland. And I just wonder, and I do not know the answer to this, I do not know the answer. I just wonder if at that point we had appeased the man in some way,
Right.
would we have prevented him or put a brake on him engaging in some of the things that he did later?
question.
Would we have done? Now, we'll never know the answer to that.
Sure.
And it's speculation on my part. I do not know. But it's an interesting point to think about.
Let me take you one more place, and then we're going to open this up for questions and let people ask what might be on their mind. But let me take you back to Beirut and back to captivity. This is obviously an institution that has a strong, strong faith basis. And through all of your experiences, you've been on a faith journey as well. You told us in Vermont about a moment, or I guess many, many moments, where you would prepare in the evening for your own spiritual moment in the morning. Tell us about the importance of the Eucharist to you and that.
Well, I was I'll say two things about that. I was very fortunate to have been brought up in a church where there was the regular use of language in worship. And I say fortunate because I was a chorister, and little did I know it at the time, but by repeating the psalms and the services of the church week in, week out, the language had somehow become a part of me, unconsciously, so that I'd memorized it. And the importance of good language, particularly when you're in a situation of extremity, rather like good music, is that language, good language, like good music, has the capacity to breathe a certain harmony into the soul. And one of the things you try to do when you're in a situation of tension and extremity and in isolation is somehow keep yourself together inwardly, mentally. You can't do a great deal about the physical deterioration of your body. And I remember seeing my body get old before its time. But in some ways you can do something about your mental state. And when it comes to then the development of that in a life, I could in my imagination link myself with fellow believers around the world. And in my imagination, remember that at some point in the world, somewhere, a group of people were celebrating together. And I would save a little bread from my supper and pour a little water into a plastic beaker and recite the language of the communion service that I'd heard many, many times when I was a youngster and through life. And also, I could remember the prayers of the church. Now, I never allowed myself to use extempore prayer. That extempore where you make up your own words. For the very simple reason, in that situation, if I'd done that, I'm pretty convinced I'd have got into a rut and would have said all the time, oh God, get me out of here, this is horrible, and just gone one way, which illustrates the importance of having a balanced prayer. So, for example, I could remember one of the old collects of the church from the Book of Common Prayer. I remember many of them. Lighten our darkness, we beseech thee, O Lord, and by thy great mercy defend us from all the perils and dangers of this night. Now, that has tremendous meaning when you're in the dark and when you're afraid. And it has that harmony of language, that rhythm of language, which helps with the point I made earlier about maintaining inner harmony and inner rhythm. And it was greatly calming. But beyond that, since being released from captivity and spending all those years in silence, I remain a member of the Anglican Church, the Church of England, but I've also become a member of the Society of Friends, the Quakers.
Right.
Now the Quakers, I don't know if you know them, they're not the Puritans. The Puritans are one breed, fairly strict. The Quakers are a group of people who, founded by George Fox in the 16th century, and their main worship does not place emphasis on language,
right,
but is on silence. You meet together on a Sunday morning for 1 hour, you sit in a circle in silence, and an individual will speak only if they have something to say, and you listen with respect to different points of view. You don't get up and then start to argue with them. You listen to them. It's listening. And the two, for me, blend well together. On the one hand, the structure of an ordered use of language, and then silence. And I think there is great healing power in the corporate use of silence.
Wonderful.
Something which we seem to lack, I think, in the world today.
Wonderful. Okay, let's turn and let you ask Sir Terry Waite any question you'd like. We'll begin back there, and we'll take about 15 minutes or 13 minutes, and then we'll be done.
Can you help us understand, in your time of captivity, were you able to bring about change to your captors? Were you able to change their behavior?
Thank you. Was I able to change the views of the captors? Well, no, because I wasn't conversing with them, and I'll tell you why not. In the very early stages of captivity, I would not let them off the hook. I said to them, look, you promised me safe conduct, and you've broken your word. And they didn't like that very much. Then I said, does it not say in the Quran, you mustn't steal? They said, yeah, we mustn't steal. I said, but you have stolen me. You've stolen me from my family. You've stolen my liberty. How do you explain that? I constantly was on them in this way. And so they said, these are the young lads who were guarding us, they said, oh, we'd better go and ask the chief about that. So they went to ask the chief, and they came back a week later. I said, well, what did the chief say? The chief said, we mustn't talk to you anymore. So, but I got no, so really there was no possibility of really any constructive conversation or dialogue with them. They just wouldn't do it. And of course the young lads, the real powers, you only saw the real leaders. I didn't see them because I was blindfolded, but they only visited occasionally. I mean, they came in when they put me through a mock execution. That's when the real leaders came into their play. But the other lads who were guarding us were young lads drawn from the villages who were brought into the organization. The very interesting story about that once you're in. There was other captives complained a lot because the food was appalling food. And they complained and they complained and complained. And after about 6 months, the head of the organization came to them. And he said, well, what are you getting? They told him. He said, oh, that's wrong. He got a certain sense of honor. So he looked into it and he discovered that the young guard had been pocketing half the money and taking the other half for himself. So they took this young lad out and they shot him. Because they said, if you'll cheat us in small matters like that, someone comes along with a bribe, you'll give the whole organization away. Which does illustrate very clearly, and this is true in many organizations of that kind all around the world. When you're in, you're in. There's no get out. You have to stay with it. And that's very difficult because, you know, young, impressionable people who, at the age of 18, 19, 20, fall under the spell of a charismatic leader. And that can happen in not just in Islam, it happened in Christianity, it happened in any of the cults or anything. When they fall under that spell and they're drawn in and want to get out, it can often be terribly difficult. I mean, I know colleagues of mine who've worked with, and you must have experienced this yourselves, some people here, people who've been drawn into a cult at that age and then find it almost impossible to get out later on. It's a dynamic that occurs. So the answer is no.
Okay, another question. Yes, sir.
Yes, my question is about the conflict in Syria. How do you see that? How do you see a solution emerging, especially after the negotiations with the United Nations and any results?
Yeah, when I was released from captivity, I was taken by a Syrian intelligence agency to Damascus and to their intelligence headquarters, where they asked me what did I want. The first thing I wanted was a haircut and my beard trimmed, which they got. They brought in a little man from the street and did that. I have no love for Assad at all, just that I haven't great love for any of the other dictators in and around the region. But I don't think we have, and I speak now purely from the point of view of my own country. I'm not going to speak about any other country, but I'll speak for my own country. I don't think we in the UK have played it in the wisest way. I think we were too quick to jump in and take sides. Admittedly, Assad was and is a ruthless dictator, and admittedly many people died. But it's quite clear, and it was quite clear to me at the time, and I said this publicly at the time, that by jumping in as we did and encouraging people to fight against him, we were actually, of course, we were going to get Al-Qaeda groups muscling in on this situation and making the situation worse. And now, like all these situations, thousands and thousands of innocent men, women, and children are the worse off. And regrettably, I think that's true in Iraq as well. It raises the question, which I think is a question that has to be asked by answered more completely and more fully by the international community. And that is, and I do not know the answer to this, is what mechanism is there for dealing with dictators, rogue states? And often the criteria we use is we will intervene and deal with them if it's in our economic interest. I mean, I take the example of Britain and Mugabe. I mean, lots of white farmers in Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia, suffered appallingly. And did we do anything from UK? No, because we're not particularly interested in bananas, you know. More interested in oil, you know. I mean, that's the answer, isn't it? And so I think what mechanisms, should we develop a mechanism, or should we just leave people to get on with it? And if so, what? And I do not know the answer to it, but I do think it's worthy of much more discussion and debate. And of course, as we know in these situations, the UN, whilst it does much valuable work, is virtually powerless to deal. I don't know, I raised that as a question, I just don't know the answer.
A couple more questions. Yes, sir. And then
More relevant to today might be Putin and his position with Crimea. And because of your unique experiences, could you comment on that? And does it apply in the same way as what you just answered? What do you see us doing to help resolve that situation in Ukraine?
Yeah, It's very interesting. Just before I came here this morning on the internet, I wrote a comment about Putin, actually. Someone had asked me to comment because a man called Nigel Farage, who is the UKIP party in the UK, was asked a question. He said, of who amongst all the international leaders do you admire the most? And he incredibly said, Putin, because he's an operator. And I thought, blimey, well, that's something, isn't it? And my comment was this effect. I'd hoped that operators had died out with the demise of the manual telephone system. I really, Putin, I mean, speaking within these four walls, I don't think I would like to trust him very far. And I think it's just a lamentable situation in Russia at the moment, which is just in the hands of big-time criminals. But that, you could say, that is true of many countries in the world too, isn't it? That many people with criminal intent get involved in these situations. As for the Ukraine, which a place I've been to, I never worked there, I visited the Ukraine. I mean, it's very complicated. On the one hand, Russia has broken international treaty, undoubtedly. On the other hand, the vast majority of the population want to be united with Russia. What do you do? I don't know. I don't know what you do in that situation. I think you have to now have, our politicians will have to have discussions and further negotiations and see where they go. But I do think he's been entirely wrong, again, in using force of arms in the way that he's done, and further threats by bringing in more arms and weapons. That seems to be, though, these days, the common response of most nations in situations of conflict. Bring in the heavy artillery, bring in the cavalry. Rather, we seem to have lost this art, or put it on the background, of long-term diplomacy, working steadily and patiently at problems, and somehow getting to problems before they emerge and erupt into the way in which they do. And I wonder if that's associated with two things, with our democratic form of government, which means that a politician has to prove himself, or see to be proving himself, before the next election, 5-year, 3-year, 5-year term. And also with the way our whole mentality is being shaped to get quick, instant results. Let's have it now.
Sure.
Quick, instant results. And our whole mentality is going that way. There's something in the world very interesting happening to the way in which we're thinking and the way in which it's affecting our behavior. And I think we could do with a bit more reflection on that and the implications of that for international diplomacy.
One last question. Yes, sir.
Perhaps you've already addressed this question, but I'm curious as to, after a year, 2 years, 3 years in solitary confinement, how does one occupy your mind?
In solitary confinement, yeah. The very important point, you have to be able to do that. Now, one of the things that happens in solitary confinement is you are forced, whether you like it or not, into deep introspection. And I have seen many people, at the moment I founded and run an organization called Hostage UK. And we deal with hostages all the time. At any given time, there are 2,000 people taken hostage in the world, a lot of people. And many of them I've seen, when they've been kept in solitary, have fallen into deep depression. Very easy to do. Because what happens is you look inside yourself, and there's a tendency to dwell on the negative side. And things that have been unpleasant for you in the past, to come to the surface. Rather like sometimes you wake in the night and you think of perhaps something you've done in the past wasn't all that good. And suddenly you feel that ugh in your stomach. That can go on constantly in captivity. And the way to deal with that, first of all, is to make the simple recognition that you're a normal human being. You're going to have the positive side, as I said earlier, and the negative side. And somehow to try and balance that and try and find some inner balance. Easy said, difficult to do. The other thing to do is to keep your mind active. I mean, I wrote my first book in my head in captivity. I had no pencil and paper, and I wrote it in my head. And I'd structure the day. It's another important thing. You've got to find a structure for the day. Very difficult when you're in constant darkness. Mercifully, I wasn't in constant darkness for too long. When I was, it was totally disorientating. Very, very difficult. But after that, when I got into, for example, a location where I could hear the call from the minaret, daybreak, midday, nighttime, then I could structure the day around that. And I used to give a period of time for writing, a period of time for doing what physical exercise I could on a chain, a period of time to for the service by prayer, if you like, and divided it in that way, so that I found the structure. So somehow the structure enabled me to keep together inwardly. And that's what you have to do. And it's not easy. It's not easy. But after a while, you begin to form a way of life. And the other thing is your whole mental attitude. I mean, many people have said to me, how do you feel about having 5 years wasted? Now, they were not wasted. I do not believe they were wasted. And I think I would say, if there's one thing I'd say to anybody in this room, is that every experience in life we have can be utilized creatively. Negative experiences as well as other experiences. And I have taken, I'm still finding now, after 20 years since I was released, that there are things I learned and I didn't know I was learning in those years, which now I can draw on and utilize. And if it's the last question, I'll finish off by saying this, that there isn't an individual in this room who hasn't suffered in some way or who will not suffer, and some greatly, in the future. It's part of the human experience. We can't understand why. It's part of our experience. What we can say with absolute conviction, I think, is that suffering need not destroy. Out of suffering, something creative can and often does emerge. And if you look back in history, you see some of the greatest creative acts have come from experiences of suffering. And as this is a Christian institution, one only has to look at the central symbol of the Christian faith to recognize that from suffering there is a new opportunity.
Sir Terry Waite, thank you for joining us today. We are so happy with you.
In this brief period of time, you can probably understand why Lipscomb and the Institute admires and so appreciates Dr. Waite and what he means to us here as our scholar in residence. I want to thank you for coming. Terry will actually be highly engaged with the university for the next few days. Later this afternoon, he'll be at the Tennessee Women's Prison with students of Lipscomb who are incarcerated. He has a heart for those who are in prison and specifically asked if he could have that opportunity, and he will.
Hold on a second.
Yes.
What did you say? With students who are incarcerated. That's not exactly the case. Let me just, as the president, try to clarify that.
Why don't you clarify exactly what word
Our
what
students-
I had in my mind didn't come out of my mouth. I'd like you to clarify that if you would.
Our students will be going into the prison with Sir Waite to work with inmates in a class, and
They're also our students. That's
they'll
what I was
also,
thinking.
they're also our students.
There
That's
you go.
exactly right. Some will be released a little bit later and come back to the dorms. I mean, it's.
I
We
love
can
that.
explain it to you if you
I
have a
love
question
that.
about it.
In my mind, I still told the truth. I just said it in a really bad way. So I wanted to clarify that. Thank you. And tomorrow, as I try to recover from that, he will be again having a breakfast with many of our students and leaders in the faith community in Nashville here on campus, talking about what faith and what perseverance has meant, as he mentioned today, in his walk. And then on Friday, he'll be actually teaching one of our graduate classes in a course on apology and forgiveness. And we're just really excited about his engagement. We're honored someone of his life and his stature and his experience has chosen to engage at Lipscomb. And Dr. Waite, thank you for being with us again. And thank you for taking time of your morning to come out with us. Take care.